I want to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking to you about serious and organised crime, talking to you about my priorities for the National Crime Agency, the nature of the threat that we face, and how we are operating. As has already been said, I've come to the National Crime Agency as a very proud detective, having served in policing for the past 26 years. Over recent years, I've seen the policing landscape change significantly. In particular, crime patterns have altered. Law enforcement is rightly proud of its success in reducing crimes like burglary and with regular intervention in things like large-scale drug supply. However, the rapid growth of technology has seen a shift from these more familiar crime types to crimes against people, often perpetrated or certainly instigated through devices within the victim's own homes. By their very nature, these are less visible to the traditional and valued patrolling police officer. Of course, there have been governance and scrutiny changes too, with the Independent Police Complaints Commission, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, Police and Crime Commissioners and the College of Policing being introduced or expanded. These are all intended to play a part in the police being able to act with the consent and the confidence of the public. The National Crime Agency plays a significant role as part of this framework. We leave our action across the spectrum of law enforcement, and where we can and where we will, act with openness and transparency. That will be fundamental to our success. The leadership challenge is for law enforcement officers to have a clear and consistent mission which they are able to keep returning to. Protection of the public, and specifically the relentless pursuit of criminals, has been my career mantra. This is what the National Crime Agency will deliver. My role as Director General is first and foremost about protecting the public, and, as I have said, doing that with an absolute focus on relentlessly pursuing criminals. The impact of serious and organised crime costs the UK economy billions of pounds a year. But more importantly, it harms communities, it destroys families, and it can ruin lives. And this also has knock-on effects for our partners. As an example, there is a significant impact on the NHS to providing vital support to victims of child sexual exploitation and the medical attention often required by those who misuse drugs. It is in the context of this that organised crime and cybercrime are recognised as national security threats. In response to them, the Home Secretary has set the National Crime Agency's strategic priorities. These priorities inform all of our planning, our bread and butter in keeping the UK safe, and I'm determined that the National Crime Agency will sit at the apex of the law enforcement response to serious and organised crime. The NCA is now no longer a new agency. Through my predecessor, Keith Bristow, we have established ourselves, and I pay tribute to the work that he did in that regard. We have developed strong partnerships, both domestically and internationally, and with the public and the private sectors. The collaborative approach is central to how the NCA leads the fight to cut serious and organised crime. I am absolutely determined to build on the excellent work started by Keith, so let me explain my plan. Firstly, I and other members of the board are prioritising work to further enhance and build confidence in the intelligence picture, to better understand the threat to the UK from serious and organised crime. This is necessary to enable us to flex our response with agility and to build our national capabilities for the future. But we cannot do this alone. The Intelligence Hub within the National Crime Agency works with key partners across government departments, industry, academia, law enforcement and security agencies to ensure that the risk the UK faces can be understood and addressed through a truly joined-up intelligence picture. In doing this, we will draw upon valid and relevant research produced by organisations such as RUSI, and will support and enable research that builds a richer picture of the threats it combats. Such improved understanding informs and enhances the UK's capability to disrupt the serious and organised crime threats that impact on its economic prosperity and the well-being of its citizens. I therefore welcome the launch of the RUSI Strategic Hub on Organised Crime, whose research will help us and the public develop a better understanding of the threat. Secondly, we will relentlessly pursue what we refer to as high priority criminals. Let's be clear. These are criminals who terrorise communities and believe themselves to be untouchable. They create a misplaced sense of power, status and position, often abusing vulnerable people to undertake criminal activity on their behalf, distancing themselves while taking most of the profit but none of the risks. They can become negative role models to some people in the process. We will focus absolute attention on these criminals, ensuring that their risk of prosecution and disruption through, for example, the loss of their assets, will rapidly increase when we are on their case. Let me be clear, their fear of us should be driven through three things. Absolute knowledge that we have access to the best intelligence, ethically and legally obtained. That our people are highly determined and focused, highly trained and skilled, and that we will present unassailable evidence to courts, gathered and presented with absolute integrity, thorough knowledge of the law, and precision in our attention to detail. Thirdly, the agency will provide specialist capabilities to our partners, whether it be the international reach we have as a result of our network of excellent liaison officers internationally, or through some of the high-end covert capabilities that we have and are developing, including those with the intelligence agencies. It makes evident economic and operational sense for some work to be done once nationally, and we have a key role in that regard. Identifying the responsibilities at national, regional and local force level in response to the threat from child sexual exploitation online is an impressive example. More of the results from that later. It also shows the important collaborative work between ourselves and the police, led jointly in that case by our Director Johnny Gwynn and the National Policing Lead for Child Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, Chief Constable Simon Bailey. We are looking to extend the model that they have developed across every one of the threat areas. Whether you are a victim of crime in a community from Land's End to John O'Groats, or whether you are a multinational business, you should know who will be protecting you from fraud or cybercrime, both areas that are more opaque and confusing to coordinated response than they should reasonably be. The work being done to introduce more consistency at regional level through the regional organised crime units, or ROCUs as we call them, will be crucial in this regard. Of course, the picture for each threat area may be different, with far greater involvement for private sector partners in the area of economic crime than in organised immigration crime, for example, where our partners in HMRC, Border Force and Immigration Enforcement have significant roles to play. This clarity will aid my role as I chair the National Strategic Tasking Coordinating Group process, a group which sits twice a year. This is a top-level multi-agency body which collectively reviews the threats and risks, considers what resources we have available, and how we will respond. Of course, I have a power in law to task others, but I would hope that this early negotiation of roles and responsibilities will provide clarity and enhance our ability to protect the public. So as the threat changes, we need to respond dynamically. There has been progress. In November last year, GCHQ and NCA launched our joint operational cell. That tackles the most technically advanced, serious and organised criminals, with an initial focus on online child sexual exploitation. Using £10 million funding announced at the 2014 We Protect Summit, the NCA has strengthened victim identification and created additional intelligence and child protection advisor capabilities. This has included opening a second child sexual exploitation hub in the Northwest and developing 8 new specialist teams to target the most serious child sexual exploitation offenders. This enhanced capability and improved response is delivering effect. For example, within the last year, proactive coordinated activity undertaken by the NCA and local police forces has resulted in over 1,250 children being safeguarded and over 900 suspects being arrested. All 900 were suspected of making, distributing or possessing indecent images of children. I truly believe that the United Kingdom's law enforcement agencies are more joined up than ever before. and increasingly demonstrated a more powerful response across a range of threats. These include CSE, as I have just mentioned, cybercrime, organised immigration crime, and firearms. Another example of this is the successful conviction of 3 members of a drug smuggling crime group who flew millions of pounds worth of cocaine into the UK, being given prison sentences totalling 66 years. This operation included invaluable help from our colleagues in the Metropolitan Police, North Yorkshire Police, Border Force, and the authorities in Germany. With their significant contribution, we have dismantled a significant criminal enterprise and stopped them from bringing large quantities of cocaine into the communities of North Yorkshire. But in addition to securing prison sentences, the NCA border investigators generated a clear insight into the risks posed by general aviation and provided a solid basis for multi-agency activity to address this vulnerability. This collaborative approach also means that high-end specialist capabilities do not have to be retained by each individual UK police force. In the NCA, we provide some top-end capabilities needed to investigate the highest risk criminals and criminal activity. This can involve complex cybercrime investigations, money laundering, or the pursuit of child sexual exploitation offenders who have made their way overseas. However, the National Crime Agency does not retain the operational lead in every investigation. It is often the case that the lead remains with another agency or police force who has requested specialist support from us. So we need absolute clarity on what we, the NCA, does, what we do with others, and what we expect from others. So I'd now like to take the opportunity to talk about the other threats that we face from serious and organised crime, to illustrate how the law enforcement response has had to change. I've already spoken about child sexual exploitation and the sheer volume that we are dealing with. 2015-16 has seen significant increases in reporting relating to both the sharing of indecent images of children and in contact child sex abuse. For example, in 2010, we received approximately 400 referrals a month from industry in respect of indecent images of children. This has risen to about 1,800 referrals a month now today. And I've also spoken about cybercrime, which for the criminals is currently low risk but high reward activity. For law enforcement, our priority and a major challenge is to identify how cyber enables the criminal marketplace for CSE, drugs, firearms, and any other criminal activity. The threat we are facing from organised immigration crime is plainly visible. The threat area spans multiple countries, nationalities, and criminal methodologies. It is exceptionally complex, and we are working with government to tackle the organised crime groups who facilitate the travel from source countries to Europe and the United Kingdom. International partners are required to make a significant contribution, and in our role as lead of the United Kingdom Organised Immigration Crime Task Force, we have deployed officers to European and African countries. So let's be clear again, this task force has already seen some success. In December last year, it played a key role in a Europe-wide day of action that resulted in the arrest of 23 members of an organised immigration crime group, including arresting the head of the organised crime group here in the UK. Using the unique reach and access of the National Crime Agency's international network and the strength of our relationships with key partners such as Europol, the task force was able to add a real sense of momentum to a joint Hellenic Police NCA investigation and ultimately dismantle a sprawling and effective criminal network. This group had been controlled and directed from the UK since 2014 and was facilitating irregular migrants, predominantly Syrian nationals, from Greece and onwards into the wider UK using the Balkan routes. Similarly, we were appalled by the terrorist attacks in Paris last year. This further highlighted the seriousness of the firearms threat to the UK. In August 2015, the National Crime Agency, with outstanding support from Kent Police, arrested 8 people suspected of involvement in the largest ever haul of automatic weapons in the UK mainland. 3 of those arrested have pleaded guilty to firearms importation offences. The trial against the other suspects started on the 24th of February. NCA officers, with support from Slovakian law enforcement partners, conducted further inquiries into a number of commercial companies based in Slovakia, legitimately selling converted military weapons. These weapons were identified as identical to those seized in Kent last year. The Slovakian authorities' investigation continues. This serves to highlight the importance of working closely with our international partners. I know that colleagues in the security service and counter-terrorism policing see the relatively low availability of firearms in the UK as a major advantage compared to many other countries. However, new challenges such as the dark web could put that advantage at risk, and therefore one of our key operational priorities in the NCA is to keep the availability of firearms in the UK low, working with force gang units and counter-terrorism colleagues. The vast majority of serious and organised crime is committed for financial gain, so we regard action to deny criminals the benefits of their crime as a key component of our overall response. We seek to do this by disrupting the individuals and systems that facilitate money laundering and by targeting the proceeds of crime directly, through asset restraint and confiscation, through civil recovery, through compensation to victims, through cash seizures, and through taxation. The most recent National Strategic Assessment defines high-end money laundering as a priority threat in its own right. This is simply defined as non-cash money laundering carried out through electronic transfers, corporate structures, and layers of trust and company ownership, which depends on access to the financial system and professional skills to be effective. Identifying and proactively investigating corrupt professional enablers is a top priority for the NCA. The vast majority of lawyers, accountants, trust and company service providers and estate agents are honest, law-abiding professionals, but a few are not. They have made a choice to facilitate serious and organised crime, so the NCA will use its capabilities to identify them, to investigate them, and to bring them to justice. We estimate that hundreds of millions of pounds are laundered via banks and their subsidiaries every year, including the profits of international corruption, major organised crime, and serious financial crime. This does not make the UK financial services the villains, but more often the unwitting victims whose services are abused by criminals. So the NCA, as the lead law enforcement agency, has pledged to change the dynamic of our relationship with the financial industry, building trust and confidence and actively working together to cut crime and protect the public. As part of our response to tackling the proceeds of international corruption, an issue which will be brought into sharp focus by the Prime Minister's Global Anti-Corruption Summit in May, the NCA's International Corruption Unit was established in February 2015. This is developing into a world-class unit leading the UK's fight against serious bribery and corruption. The International Corruption Unit enjoys full access to all of the NCA's capabilities, including its international reach, its covert intelligence tools, and civil recovery and tax powers. The NCA is using these capabilities to investigate corrupt officials who steal their country's wealth and deprive their citizens of food, shelter, and education. The NCA seeks to bring to justice those corrupt officials and return the wealth to its rightful owners. For example, our civil recovery and tax team recently returned £29 million to Macau, the first time that the UK has repatriated proceeds of crime under the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And last month, a specialist money launderer who attempted to receive and wash the proceeds of a German bank fraud committed nearly 15 years ago has been ordered by the court to hand over more than £4.7 million. But it goes without saying that these are challenging times for all of law enforcement. As traditional face-to-face crime decreases, criminality in the cybersphere is on the rise. It is used to communicate, launder money, arrange illegal shipments, and blackmail children from anywhere in the world. It has also opened up new crimes, such as distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks, and sharing of indecent images of children, plus the dark web, all of which never existed 20 years ago. The financial cost to UK businesses as a result of cybercrime continues to increase. We currently assess the financial cost of cybercrime to be well over £1 billion a year. Increasingly, cybercrime is layered in anonymity and encryption, which further complicates the need to develop the proportionate capabilities and legislation required to ensure serious and organised criminals do not have easy hiding places from law enforcement. Although the devices and applications are legitimate, their adoption by organised crime groups can help them to evade detection. As law enforcement, we must therefore ensure that our own technical capabilities are constantly evolving and adapting as crime changes, and that our officers are skilled to tackle crime in a digital environment. There is an ongoing and important debate around how to balance both public protection and privacy. I absolutely understand the concerns about privacy, which is much and rightly valued. Equally, though, my role necessitates that I protect the public. The draft Investigatory Powers Bill seeks to balance these two responsibilities while streamlining and updating the legislation for law enforcement powers in the areas of communications data, equipment interference and lawful intercept, reinforcing transparency and oversight. The bill will help to bridge the gap between the capabilities of law enforcement and criminals. Whilst criminal groups are able to take advantage of sophisticated developments in technology, law enforcement is currently unable to keep pace, match their capabilities and deliver the same criminal justice outcomes against those operating online, as we are able to do against those operating in the real world. And that is why there is a proposition that internet connection records should be kept by telecom providers. Internet connection records are about updating law enforcement's use of communications data for the internet age. Communications data is mission critical to law enforcement, routinely used to tackle crime or find missing people. It provides crucial and critical intelligence and information about, for example, with whom a suspect or victim has been in contact, where and when the communication took place, and by which means. However, to be very clear, it does not provide the content of the communication. Communications data is used in 95% of serious and organised crime prosecution cases handled by the Crown Prosecution Service. Indeed, some of the earlier successes I mentioned demonstrate that without access to the right information to support our investigative work, our ability to protect people in the UK from harm will be seriously undermined. I believe it is really important that the public understand why we need to use different technologies and techniques. I passionately believe in policing by consent, and that means explaining where possible what we do and why. This is why we and our partners have contributed to this process, setting out the operational implications of the different options being considered. Having made our contribution, however, we must recognise that not every investigative technique can or will be discussed publicly. To do so would be to hand an advantage to criminals. I therefore believe that public confidence in this area needs to come from the transparency of the authorisation of warrants, the creation of a new judicial oversight body, and the accountability process. As a law enforcement leader, it is my responsibility to speak with candour about the changing nature of the threat to the people of the UK, our communities, our businesses, and our children. It is for Parliament to decide the balance of any powers and the oversight arrangements that should be put in place. So whilst I've been talking to you about the changing threat, you may have been thinking to yourself that the NCA operational results, which received the most publicity, remain in the area of large drug seizures. For example, the recent conviction of 8 drug traffickers who attempted to bring 1.3 tonnes of cocaine into Europe, or the 2.4 tonnes of cocaine seized last December a few miles off the UK south coast. Drugs still remain a high-volume, high-frequency, serious and organised crime threat with both national and local impacts. It commonly cuts across other threats, such as organised immigration crime, human trafficking, and modern slavery, and money laundering. And a significant amount of drug traffickers are involved in violent crime, including the deadly use of firearms. Drugs also sit at the core of UK urban street gang culture and exploitation of the young and vulnerable. For these reasons, it is therefore important to maintain a priority stance to drug trafficking. So the NCAA will carry on chasing the kilos, not because it is easy or because it's what we've always done, but because the links and connections with the priority threat areas and the risks to the public are there. When I arrived at the NCA, it was clear that it was delivering some truly outstanding operational results and had an enormous reach working with international partners to bring the most serious criminals to justice. It also undertook highly sophisticated intelligence work to assist the national picture of the threats faced by the UK. In order to be able to provide the most effective response to the threats as they change, I believe that the agency needs three things. The first is a credible and developed intelligence picture which both we and our partners have confidence in. This will allow us to task activity with confidence towards the greatest threat. The second is to provide clarity both within the agency and amongst our partners over who contributes what. Our focus will be the so-called untouchables, those who have sought to build industries of organised crime. We will ensure that none of them are beyond our reach, no matter how sophisticated their offending. Put simply, there will be no hiding places. Third is to develop and deliver specialist capabilities, which we will host on behalf of law enforcement, which maximise our collective impact on the organised crime threat. None of this can be delivered without investment in our staff, undoubtedly our greatest asset. I am privileged that every day I am able to meet and speak with high-calibre NCA officers with a range of specialist skills. Organised crime is becoming increasingly complex, and unless we recruit and retain the best, we will not keep pace. This must therefore be at the front of our mission. I hope I have given you some insight into the challenges we face from serious and organised crime and shared how the agency will work with partners to respond. Of course, in some areas we are not there yet, and within the agency I have many forthright and thoughtful officers who are willing to talk to me about what more we need to do to deliver all I have proposed today. My pledge to you is I will lead that change in my organisation, and you should reflect on the contribution from your organisation too. Protecting communities from serious and organised crime is a worthy mission. And as that great civil rights campaigner Martin Luther King once said, our lives begin to end the day we stay silent about the things that matter. Thank you.
Lynne, thank you so much for that introduction to the issues which I think we're all concerned about, and it's I think reassuring that they're in the capable hands, tackling these issues are in your capable hands and those of your staff. Do we have microphones available? No? Do we have a microphone? No microphones. People will have to speak up. If you would like to indicate when you want to ask a question, then I will call you, and if you could introduce yourself before asking your question. Please, at the back here. Owen. Ewan.
Thank you very much. My name is Ewan Grant. I'm a RUSI member and former Customs and Excise Intelligence Analyst. That's pre-merger and before the transfer to SOCA and then NCA. Collateral benefits. Clearly, electronic cyber has got much bigger, even bigger. You mentioned the 95% where cases relying significantly on communications data. Are there any? Can you give any examples of where research and investigations on CEOP or similar investigations have led to other successful investigations or intelligence, perhaps for civil actions or tax or whatever, outside the subject? Collateral benefit.
Lynne, please.
So I think at the heart of your question is this point about relentlessness. When you look at volume investigation into offences, it tends to be a reactive response to a case in point. What I've just presented to you is a different view of the world in which you start from the position of the criminal and then you attack them through whatever route that you find available. So you are after a specific example. If you look at the work that we are currently doing from within our CEOP command, of course we are getting referrals from industry into individuals, as well as doing the research on their activity generally down the web in respect of their abuse of children, we would expect the intelligence package to include their financial history, any fraud activity they might have been involved in. We would exploit all the technologies that you see at the border and beyond in terms of understanding travel patterns. We would seek to draw any links with human trafficking as an example. And I haven't got specifics here, but there have been inquiries where we have absolutely been able to draw that line across all. So we don't just take a crime type and a threat type and deal with it. We start with the intelligence, we focus it on the criminal, and having focused on the criminal, we then look broadly and widely, looking across every aspect of criminality, because ultimately we just want to stop their behaviour.
John in the front row. There is a microphone available.
Thank you. John Wilson, a member of the Institute and the journalist. Director General, you've mentioned quite rightly the problem of the increase in investigations relating to women and children's crime. What worries me is this: have you got sufficient increase in resources to cope with this explosion? And has the involvement of GCHQ in any way, do you think, denigrated or not deteriorated, degraded, perhaps is the word I'm thinking of, its capabilities from a military point of view?
So to start with the first question, we are still seeing the rise of increase of offending, and that does concern us because we haven't reached a plateau yet. I think a year or two ago we were thinking that what has become in common parlance the Jimmy Savile effect would start to level out, and actually that isn't being borne out in the offending patterns that we're seeing. So I was talking to Simon Bailey and Johnny Gwynn about this the other day, our two national leads, and they are currently doing a piece of work with academia to see if we can better predict what the future trends might look like and what that means for us. Your second question, which is about degrading capability, is something we are absolutely focused on, because we would not, of course, want to put the security services in anything like that position. They and we are confident that the work that they are doing with us can be introduced into a law enforcement environment in a way that we can appropriately respond to what they're finding without having to expose any techniques.
A question just at the back here.
Hi Lynne, I'm Anna Marie Bishop. I'm Head of Development at Crime Stoppers. It's really great to be here, and it's been really useful for us to sort of get a sense of what role we might play in that partnership working, as I know that we do. I guess we have a couple of questions about how this sort of impacts the way the NCA works with local policing. So you mentioned before about really sort of gearing up with specialist skill sets to tackle some key priority areas. So my first question is, what do you see as that having implications and impacts to the way that local policing traditionally recruits, and also what their capabilities need to be to join up with that working?
As you know, Anne-Marie, Crime Stoppers is one of our primary partners, and we're immensely grateful for the support of Crime Stoppers in the campaign work that we've done, both in Madrid in Spain, the campaign that we've launched jointly in the Netherlands, and indeed the other work that we do in local forces. So Sarah Thornton, who is the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, get my phraseology right, the NPCC, is now leading this piece of work that we are completely integrated into on specialist capabilities. So answering the question, what are the things that should be delivered once nationally, what are the things that can more effectively be delivered through regional structures, and what is the core basis of policing that should operate at a very local policing level. I do think there is a question about having done that piece of work, there's then a secondary question about what skills and abilities do we need to service each of those levels. And I do think they'll look different in different places depending on how you're responding to the threat. So local neighbourhood policing, much valued in this country, absolutely needs to be protected, because we know that the communities of this country to have confidence in us require the visible, engaged local police officers. But I can see in a future world they are going to need to be more digitally savvy, and they're going to need to be thinking about what does crime prevention advice online look like, in the same way that previously we might have advised to fit car alarms and burglar alarms and those sort of things. Certainly in terms of my recruiting pool, we recognise that we need to have top-end, experienced capable investigators who know how to put a very good case file together. But equally, we need to attract people that have got a deep interest in cyber that might not see their whole career as law enforcement, and we shouldn't see that as a threat. So I think once we've done the work about what sits locally, what sits regionally, and what sits nationally, there is then a question about who you attract into those different roles and responsibilities.
So my second question was, you talk very much about getting to the core of the criminality and driving prosecutions and outcomes in that way. What do you think is the NCA's threshold to actually be involved in prosecuting organised criminals?
So the phrase I've used is, I think there are some iconic untouchables, so some key criminals who have built up a script around themselves that absolutely hits the streets, where local police forces and regional police forces are actually saying we are really struggling to use the techniques at our availability to intercede against that individual. So we're currently doing a piece of work through our intelligence hub with every force in the country saying, help us define who those people are in your eyes, because actually much of this relies on the impact that's happening in communities. Often they will have an international reach. They will either have placed their money abroad or their assets abroad, or they themselves will have moved abroad. So that international reach is important. So that's where I'd put the tier. We are asking the regions to say, who do you think your iconic untouchables are, based on the threat analysis that we have done. And often those people have international reach. They are the people that will have no hiding place when the NCA delivers.
Very good. And the lady here.
Thank you. Peter Ripley, a member of the Institute. Director General, I was very interested to hear you emphasising yet again the importance of collaborative approach and working nationally and internationally. I wonder if you'd like to comment on what impact there would be if Britain exits Europe.
So as I've said, we have a wide network in Europe and beyond. So should I stand up? I feel a bit rude talking to you from sitting. No, then you can't hear me. Oh, I got a podium. So we have a wide network of international officers deployed overseas. At the moment, of course, we use the European information sharing protocols. We use European arrest warrants. It's a really good example, I think, of an incident where it's not for us to say actually whether we should be in or out. We should be talking about the operational consequences. If we were no longer in Europe, we would have to identify a number of bilateral arrangements with different countries and situations. The key for me is that we can share intelligence quickly and that we can take action on cases as they arrive. It's for others to decide whether we are better in or out of Europe.
Indeed. David, please, over here.
Director General, much of what you said was with regard to drugs, arms and people involves penetrating our borders. We've got a huge border right down the east coast from Berwick-Tweedmouth right down to Kent. We've also got a lot of airstrips from Millfield and North Northumberland right down past London. Is anything being done to sort of, to keep an eye on the borders, to control the borders, and to see what can be done? Because from my understanding, a lot of crime is being committed by coming into the country around the East Coast ports.
So there are a number of authorities in this country responsible for the policing of the border. Our responsibility of the border is to intercede against organised crime. We have a very close working relationship with Border Force, Immigration Enforcement, HMRC, local police forces, and indeed ourselves. You'll see from some of the examples that I've given to you, there have been some really good operations where we have jointly, either bilaterally or across agencies, being able to take action. But of course, we shouldn't be timid about recognising that there is a threat.
Gentleman here.
Kerry Zitz, a member of the public. Director General, you talked about tackling professional enablers, but it seems to me that the larger the oligarch, the easier it is for them to take on top-level law firms or accountants. What efforts can you make to dissuade them from taking on these sort of clients in the first place?
So as I try to cover in my speech, there are many, and I'm keen to stress this for fear that it could be interpreted any other way, but there are many legitimate professional law firms and others who are persuaded into business with these people. The best thing that we can do is share intelligence where we can early, but I'm afraid I've always been a big believer in actually if you can't persuade through negotiation, you have to persuade through enforcement. So I think they will be persuaded by our taking action against those who engage in that way.
And next.
Thank you. My name is Alexis Flynn. I'm the UK correspondent for the Wall Street Journal in America. I just wondered if you had noticed any kind of convergence between organised crime and terrorism, and if so, whether that might suggest more of a role for the NCA in the counter-terrorist operations in the UK. Thanks.
So thanks for that question. I mean, there are a number of areas where there are clearly potential overlaps. So we've just touched on the question about the border. I think there is a potential overlap, of course, with the supply of firearms, and I touched on that in my speech. There are concerns about organised immigration crime and whether that could be used as a route to bring terrorists into the country. So more crucially than ever, the work that we do with the Counter-Terrorism Command that's currently led by Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley is absolutely key. He and I have a shared programme of work, and in fact we only met this week to reframe that programme of work to focus it, yes, on where we can share capacity and capability, but equally importantly, how we quickly share information and intelligence so we assess operational threats as they arise.
Gentleman here.
Hello, Giles Haddell from the Digital Policing Programme. You talked a lot about cybercrime and the changing capabilities needed within law enforcement. Just wonder what your views are on the responsibilities of the private sector around making their systems more secure.
Yeah, I think there's two responsibilities in this regard. So yes, absolutely a responsibility on the private sector, both to make their systems more secure and to share information with us about how they think they're being targeted. We absolutely recognise that people are sometimes reluctant to do that because they're worried it might undermine their product, but without that knowledge it makes it very hard for us to design for the future. Equally, I think they have a responsibility at point of sale and purchase to help the innocent member of the public understand what protections they can put in place themselves. So I think we need to think about what a modern crime prevention strategy looks like in the world of cyber, which involves both industry and the public citizen.
Callum.
Alan Jeffrey, Research Fellow at WC. My question is around your comments on the Investigatory Powers Bill. I wonder if a lot of focus is paid particularly to the capabilities of GCHQ, for example. I wonder if law enforcement's voice, particularly NCA, has been loud enough in that debate, and particularly around your comments around internet connection records. I think most people would accept the logic of having communications data as part of 95% of prosecutions, but interconnection records seem to be something very different in terms of your comments about proportionality, how we can help explain to the public how those work and what benefit they bring.
Perhaps, Callum, if I were to give you an operation example, that might be helpful. So I talked about the 1,800 referrals we get about peer-to-peer sharing every month. In some of those cases, we know that those offenders are targeting youngsters who will be online, live online, so not some offence committed in history. In some instances, they may have groomed or persuaded that child to go and meet with them, and the first we know about it is either when we are doing a proactive investigation or, worse still, when a parent reports their child missing. At the moment, in current money or old money, if those communications had happened by telephone, we would have been able to access that data. Because that is now happening through the internet, we would simply be unable to protect that child in those circumstances, and I cannot conceive of a parent that wouldn't think our accessing of internet connection records in those circumstances appropriately justified and subject to the warrantary arrangements that are going to put in place wouldn't be a sensible thing to do.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. Director General, my name is John Sheldrake. I'm an individual member of RUSI, and I work in the Faculty of Engineering at Imperial College. And I wondered, given the rapid pace of technological development, do you have the resources, do you have the research and development capacity to stay ahead of current developments?
Not operating on our own, no, which is why I made the point at the very beginning of my speech that our relationship with private industry and academia is absolutely key. I think it does need us to operate together. I do employ some really top-end specialists, but I don't think we will be able to stay ahead of this on our own, which is why I chose to here today as one of the places to speak first publicly about some of the threats and challenges we face.
Please at the front.
Two questions, if I may. The first one is, you talked about the need to tackle the untouchables. Yeah, Danny Shaw from BBC. You talked about the need to tackle the untouchables. We have heard that message before from other police leaders, from Home Secretaries, from Prime Ministers over the past 10 years or more. What is going to be different about your approach to tackling the untouchables? And the second question is, how can people have confidence in what you're setting out to achieve, given the record at Surrey, which was assessed as inadequate on child sexual exploitation and requiring improvement on tackling serious and organised crime?
So on the first question, so what's going to be different? Well, the first thing to say is that this agency has now been operational for 18 months, and we have a very good working relationship with partners overseas. We have some top-end capabilities that are relatively new. We have a good working relationship with policing and the security services, and I believe we now have the tools available to us to enable us to do that. The second question, as you'll have seen from the reports by HMIC, they also praise the leadership of the force and the plans that we had put in place to address the deficiencies that they rightly highlighted. I would of course stress that for child protection, I originally invited the HMIC into the force because I am a leader that will always strive to improve a situation and to make it better. My focus now, Danny, is on delivering the results that I have described for the National Crime Agency, and I don't want to be distracted from that.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Director. My name is Claudio Petroziello. I am an Italian anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing expert. So, you spoke about money laundering, and if I got well, your assessment is you were talking about 100 millions of euro or of pounds is the money laundering assessment in UK. How do you think that this amount affect legal economy in UK, and how is dangerous for economic freedom in UK money laundering?
So as we develop our intelligence picture on money laundering, I think one of the things that we need to understand better than we currently do is how much of that money is placed within this country, operating within our system, and how much of it is held here and is used as part of a transitory route to elsewhere. I think when we can answer that question, I will be able to answer your question.
Thank you. We got other questions? I had gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Chris Hurry, Home Office retired. My role was dealing with technology at the borders, and my question is, what do you think is the role for big data within crime fighting? The agencies at the border and agencies within the UK and businesses collect huge amounts of statistics which might tell you what's going on and how trends are changing. Do you think that's helpful, and if so, do you have the capability to analyse it?
I think that's an absolutely excellent question. So I do think the public would be quite surprised. I think the public presume a level of sharing of information across the public sector that doesn't happen at the moment for all sorts of laudable reasons around privacy and data protection and other things. But actually, if you just look at the information we capture at the border, I think that could helpfully help us understand some of the things that we've been talking about today, whether it be money flows or people flows, and some patterns of behaviour of criminals that would then help us to do what Danny just asked me about, what you're going to do differently. But if we're going to do that, we need to have those conversations, I think, with the public about how their data is being used, so that there isn't concern that it's Big Brother. I actually think people think we're doing it already, but of course, as you know, we're not.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. Hugo Rosemont, a member of the Institute, also King's College London. It's picking up on the point of relationships with the private sector and your response to that. In terms of the mechanisms for public-private cooperation, are you satisfied that those mechanisms are in place at the moment for the sort of coverage for the private sector cooperation that you're looking for? Thanks.
I think it's different across the threat areas. I think we are just starting to build a pretty impressive relationship with the financial sector, set up a shared and joint intelligence function with some of the big banks. I'm not sure that our network across the cybersecurity is as good as it could be. I do think the creation of the National Cyber Centre gives us some potential to grow and expand that even more. But if anyone in the room has ideas of more we could do to engage industry, then I'd be really happy and pleased to hear them.
Unless there are further urgent questions, I'm going to have to draw this discussion to a close. I think we've got our money's worth out of you, Lynne, over the last hour, for which we're very grateful indeed. I thank you also, actually, to all our questioners for asking succinct and clear and focused questions which have got the best value out of yourself. We are delighted here in RUSI to have this opportunity to discuss these issues, not least because we have just launched our strategic hub on organised crime research in partnership with the NCA, with the Home Office, and with support from the UK Research Council.